can't call her. And I bet you felt the same thing as well. But sometimes in that space where we can't pick up the phone or send an email or a text to the person that we want to, it gives us space to try something new, to figure something out. And I loved this summer how beautifully the people of St. Paul's took care of each other and the ministries that Sara usually chairs on their own. Y'all, did a great job this summer. Our pastoral care wasn't as full. Our commitment to the community wasn't as robust. Our staff was lacking significantly, but I saw us discover ways that we can be faithful, ways that we might ordinarily take for granted because Sara does so much behind the scenes. But I hope that we can, now that she's back, not simply say, "Phew, glad she's back, I'm not going to do that anymore," but remember what it is that we've been carrying, particularly the leadership of the ministries that we've been carrying on her behalf. Don't put them down. Keep running so that Sara will pick up something else, and she will come along us, and she will support us and walk with us in that. But let's not return. Let's grow from where we are. So that's my invitation to us. But part of that is hearing about Sara's sabbatical, hearing about the summer, and I'm really excited to hear from her. We have a gift to give her, which is this basket of notes. And as much as I would love to read all 200 of these notes right now, I'm going to let Sara read them in her own time. If you didn't have a chance to write Sara a note of welcome back to tell her how glad you are that she's back, it's not too late. There's always time to write a note to someone you love. So feel free to write Sara a note. But Sara, these are for you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you all, and thanks to those who have also handed me notes. I really appreciate it. I will delight in reading these. Before we get started, I thought I would share with you this prayer that when usually I'm praying it in morning prayer, it's the collect for Saturdays, that I'm usually like, yeah, right. But we pray it, and sometimes we fake it till we make it. But here, let us pray. Almighty God, who after the creation of the world rested from all your works and sanctified a day of rest for all your creatures, grant that we, putting away all earthly anxieties, may be duly prepared for the service of your sanctuary, and that our rest here upon earth may be a preparation for the eternal rest promised to your people in heaven through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. If you haven't yet heard Evan's sermon this morning, or if you were in the 9 o'clock service, you didn't hear, or you might have already heard, Evan describes a sabbatical or Sabbath as glorious resting in God. And that is what I got to do this summer. Gloriously rest and delight in God and with friends and family. And so we're going to go through this whirlwind of pictures pretty fast. So, in some ways I want to be like, buckle up, buttercup, like, let's go. But that would be antithetical to the pace of my sabbatical, which was go with the flow. Your prayers buoyed me through these 3 months that I was away. I felt sustained. I felt I had complete trust that all was going to work out, that all shall be well. And I just rode that river of spirit through this time. So thanks to you, and thanks be to God. I started my sabbatical at home, as one does, time in the garden, time playing games with the family, just drinking my coffee on the patio. This in the bottom left is Autumn, who just graduated. She had a lot of senior things happening that I was able to attend. Avery and I took a walk down in Kohler more than once, and then that's kind of like a metaphor for Casey and me through this summer. We got to spend a lot of time together that we hadn't, but those were just cardinals in the backyard. And then, of course, Autumn's graduation was the first thing. My first week of sabbatical was kind of, aside from those times out, hectically getting the house ready for graduation party. And so Autumn graduated. Autumn's a swimmer, if you didn't know. She swam with Bentonville West and is now swimming for Southern Illinois, the Salukis. But Casey and she share a similar stance. So if you haven't met my husband, that is my husband, Casey, and he's about 6'5", if you don't know. And so this is our whole family in the left, and that's our bonus kids at the far left and far right. So you can tell I'm the short one in the family. Casey, Ashton, me, Autumn, Alexander, and Avery. And the big kids live in Nashville and with their significant others. And so it was just, I was just so joyful. And so Casey and I took a trip to Nashville to see the big kids and took them out to eat. Again, there's a heron that hangs out at Kohler Park. We got to go with the family when the Nashville kids were home to Crystal Bridges. And thanks to Daphne's recommendation, Casey and Autumn got T-shirt quilts from all of their swim shirts. She's been swimming since she was in kindergarten. So there's still shirts. We could probably make another 5 quilts. But then the big part of my sabbatical, after a month at home, I spent 5 weeks in Europe, in Germany, France, England, and Scotland. And so this is kind of a whirlwind through my time there. Beforehand, I wanted to have a sense of connecting in place with my ancestors. And so as I said, I intended to connect with the ancestors through a sense of place. And I really came away knowing that we are connected as children of God, and especially connected in nature. I remember as distinctly I was in Germany, and I was like, this could be anywhere. This could be home. This is here. We are all beloved children of God. And that deep sense of knowing connected me to the human family, and especially our family in God, in a deep and meaningful way. So 5 weeks, 4 countries, 1 traveler, 2 bags that turned into 4. I think I counted right, about 17 churches, cathedrals, or abbeys, 1 car rental, 1 minor vehicle incident, and countless memories. So that's about all you'll get from statistics for me. My delay, the travel started with them canceling my flight out of Kansas City, so Casey and I got extra time together, but then we were on our way. I connected in Philadelphia, and if you haven't seen the Lego Liberty Bell, it's there, but pay attention to how they spell Pennsylvania. And then in Munich, I took the train to a couple of stations away so my friend Uta could pick me up and take me to her home in Bayreuth, Bavaria, Germany. It's in northern Bavaria. These are just some scenes around the park by her house. And this house on the far right is where her mother currently lives on the 2nd floor. And it's a house that her mother's grandfather or father built. And so it's a family home. Uta didn't grow up there, but has lived in the guest house behind. So we got to go and visit with her mother there. Just some scenes at Uta's house. I told Casey we're getting one of these egg chairs for our backyard. A great place for morning prayer, and just some delights and hospitality in Uta's home. And again, the park that's by our house, that's not a real alligator. That's just concrete. But Google Maps will even take you through people's fields as shortcuts when you're going to places and countries that you don't know where you're going. Of course, I went to the beer garden. This was Uta's favorite. This is my friend Uta. We met about 20 years ago, I think we figured. We have children the same age. I haven't seen Uta in 7 years. And she was surprised when I said I was coming. But in one of those God things, it was at a right time in her life when she, and probably in ways that I don't yet know, needed our friendship to be rekindled. And she said she is looking to deepen her relationship to Jesus. And so she had a lot of questions about Jesus, about why I said Christ more often than I said Jesus. And so lots of spiritual conversations in Bayreuth. But we quickly went to Taizé, her church. And so Taizé is a monastic community, an ecumenical Christian community. There's about, I think, 70 or 80 monks who live there or around the world. This is Stations of the Cross. It's around that lake where the swans were. The bells of Taizé ring before every service. There are services 3 times a day. And this is a link to the bells. You can listen on YouTube to the bells ring for like 10 minutes or so. So we would start out morning with worship and breakfast, then Bible study, then the group Bible study, which they had an English-speaking group for me. I arrived in Germany on Pentecost Sunday because of the delay, and it was windy, like unusually windy. And I was like, of course, it's Pentecost. And Uta's like, of course, you're going to say it's Pentecost. And then it was Pentecost holiday for the Germans in Bavaria. And so there were a lot of Germans at Taizé. I think they said there were like 1,400 of us there, about 200 adults, the rest were youth. And most of the people spoke German. So there was a lot of German, a lot of English. It was very Pentecostal. They call that lake the source, and so I just got to walk every afternoon. It was around 85 to 90 degrees, no AC. But I could lay in the grass and read for 2 hours. and I didn't have mosquitoes or ants or anything. It was lovely. The picture in the top right is the worship building, and there's this card that says silence because we were to keep silence when we went inside. And I had bread and chocolate and butter every morning for all week. I figured out how I liked my bread and butter and chocolate together. And the bowl was our cup, and the spoon at every meal, you just get a spoon. There's no forks or no knives in there, so that was lovely. However, this is Uta and I in the evening times after the evening worship. If you choose not to stay and worship, continuing with the Taizé chants, you can go to the Oyak, and where they have concessions. And so you can get gelato and cappuccinos or pizza or wine or beer, and for an extra cost. Everybody at Taizé has a job, kind of like if you stay at a hostel. And so Uta's and my job was dish duty at lunch. This is inside work. You're not supposed to take pictures inside. So these may or may not have been taken when I was there. They were. God forgive me. So just pictures of inside the worship. There's no seats. There are stairs on the side for us older folks. Or a lot of people use the kneeling benches like you would use in meditation. On Saturday night, they have the service of light. That's like the Easter Vigil service. And those skinny little tapers burn for about 2 minutes and go out on their own. There's no wax stripping or anything. And so 1,500 people have little tapers, and it works. And there was actually a monk who was making his vows to join the community. That I was too far away, I couldn't see. But normally I set up on the other side of that wall near the altar and could see the icon of the Mary and her son. And so there are icons everywhere around. I've told Adam that I would love for our St. Paul's youth, our Arkansas youth, to be able to make a pilgrimage to Taizé. Is very meaningful. When I was there, the church group that we went with, Uta's church group, was a Lutheran group, and they had about 25 youth from their youth group that were going. And when I went to the American breakout group, they sorted us by countries. There was a youth group from New Orleans, the cathedral down in New Orleans, were there. So that was fun. Back to Bayreuth for a couple of nights, and the Hermitage is a place we walked around, gorgeous, of course. Uta and I just took in the sights and the scenes and played around a little bit. She showed me her favorite trees. I learned that like the ancient trees I was like, why do they have like dog tags on them? And that's how they tag their old trees, to keep track of them for their growth, for any disease or threat to them. And they are beautiful. And of course, the bakery, mostly for Casey. I had to take pictures of all the bakery. And Uta's home, she was so generous to open it to me. And then, because of the trip to Taizé, I met Pastor Martin, and he's the senior pastor at this Holy Trinity Church in Bayreuth. And so he took us on a bell tower tour. But of course, we paused at the organ, and I was like, well, show me the organ. Jack would love to see, and Carol to see the pictures. And then he was like, and who knows what this is in the middle? Does anybody know what this is in the middle? Any guesses? And I was like, well, it looks like a baptismal font lid. And he's like, right. He's like, most people don't get that, but that used to be their baptismal font cover, but they've suspended it in the room that they use for a youth room. So we got to go in the bell tower. 300, 600 years old? I don't know. They're old bells. He said it's fun to take youth up in the tower. He did push one to ring it while we were up there. But so this is where we were up. And so down one side is one view, and other side in downtown Bayreuth is where we were. You start singing Willy Wonka songs now if you'd like. And this is Uta. That's her mother, who just turned 89 or 90, who was also on this tour with us. And Uta's son, Thomas, who's Alexander's age, was a driver there. And then another picture of the clock that's on the outside of the other tower from the bell tower, and the sanctuary, which below is you can go down to the crypt. And of course, no pictures in crypts, but very holy places. Uta's mother's father is listed in the book of those who died during World War II. And they're like, well, his name is in this book. We don't know where it is. And I kid you not, I touched the screen, and they're like, there's his name. Like, they didn't know where it was in the book, but just touch it, and there it was. So thanks be to God. I don't mean to be blithe. Thank you, God, for all your gifts. So we ate. Uta took me to a hillside that was meaningful for her when her father was dying, and so we sat and watched the sunset. And then we went down to Lake Starnberg, which Uta, in her full Germanness, was fine to swim in the 65-degree lake. Sara was not. We ate. We went on a boat ride, observed all the statuary. That's the kitchen of the house where we stayed, and passed the food through to sit at the patio. Just view from our boat ride, we would talk about, well, you could have that house, and I'll have this house. There's plenty of room for the children. And then that's just the lake itself. And the Buchheim Museum is the art museum that's off of the lake. So our boat ride was just along the southern part from Bernried down to Seesot, over to the right, and then up to Tutzing, and then back down to Bernried, where there is a monastery. And we were there during the Corpus Christi procession. So it was beautiful to see the homes and how they put out. I was like, what are all this red fabric? So she's like, oh, they're getting ready for the procession. The roses are just there all the time. But so it was lovely to participate in them, see them in their lederhosen and formal dress. I think that's the bank of the stop, kind of like our rogation procession where we stop and pray. The Corpus Christi procession, stopping to pray and ask for the presence of Christ to be with them in their village. And that's their monastery where the church is. And just more images from of them and the procession, the neighborhood, and that's the patio outside the house where we stayed for that week. Babsy was our host, and she's a delightful woman who was so happy we went on the procession with them. How am I doing on time? Okay. So we were in southern Bavaria, where Bernried is, and so very close to the Alps, and I wanted to see a castle. It was like, of course you do, you're American. You want to do the touristy things. So we drove down to, I didn't get tickets in time to go to the Neuschwanstein Castle, and she's like, well, it's Pentecost holiday, you shouldn't have waited. I was like, I know. So we went to Linderhof Palace, which even though it's small, it's the only complete one that King Ludwig had built, and he lived there for like the last 3 years of his life, I think she said. And so these are just some scenes from Linderhof Palace. Again, very busy, very hot, no air conditioning. Did I mention that? And just some more scenes. They have the Moroccan house on the site, which he bought from like one of the world fairs. Very beautiful. And on the way back, we stopped at in Etal, and there's the Etal Monastery. This is the view inside the dome. Inside, I was like, I love St. Paul's. I think it's beautiful. And I'm grateful that there's not too many beautiful things to distract me. There were altars all around the inside of the nave, and I was just like, I would get lost in a different kind of wonder, love, and praise. A view of their sanctuary, their prayer room, and another chapel they had, the Rainbow Chapel. Their altar has the words for light in different languages is the base of the altar. And actually there's a column of light that goes down into their crypt. So it's bringing the light of Christ down into the crypt. I kind of overlaid Google Translate on this and took a screenshot because Dietrich Bonhoeffer actually was here from November in 40 to February of 41. He had a refuge and stayed at the Etal Monastery there. And so the prevalence of the memorials and the tribute to World War I and World War II were very prevalent everywhere that I went. So just some other scenes of you from where we sat for breakfast at Lake Starnberg. The Buchheim Museum, an original Picasso, and just some other paintings that were lovely. And then our last night at Bernried was the Johanni fire. So not only the Corpus Christi procession, but it was also, I think they did it a night early. It was the night before the summer solstice, or maybe it was the night before. And so the Johanni fire is a traditional thing in Bavaria. Kind of combines both like the pagan summer solstice and the feast of St. John the Baptist. So whichever you want to do. So they have the firefighters there, and you watch. They didn't start it until around 9. This was like at 11:30, and it's still going strong. We had to be up early the next morning for me to catch my flight, so I'm like, Uta, we got to go. But we talked about, you put something into the fire that you let go of. And so we had a very deep spiritual sharing of what we wanted to let go of, which in the middle of my sabbatical was very meaningful to me. So then off on my way to England. And so I'm sure, how many of you all have been to England before? See, almost half of you. So some of these sites hopefully will be familiar. This is where I stayed at my first night's meal because I hadn't eaten all day. Don't judge me for my gin and tonic. I got there, I was so hot, I had walked around the block because I didn't read my maps right from the train. And the first thing I did was I went and I tried to open the windows, and of course they only open about that much. And so I'm propping desk drawers to hold the window open because they're not staying open. And then I found the thermostat. This one did have air conditioning. I got to worship at St. Paul's Cathedral there, and just gorgeous. And I didn't take a lot of pictures of the places. I just bought the official guidebooks. So I have a lot of official guidebooks that my family is not interested in looking at. And there was a Hiroshaji exhibit at the British Museum. I got to see the Rosetta Stone. Had a Sunday roast. The British Museum, it was so hot that they had some galleries closed, and it was so incredibly full and rushed. I was rushed through, but still got to see some beautiful things, and I felt not great about colonialism and imperialism. I felt like these sacred monuments needed to be in their home places. I felt, much like when we talk about, we have a negative association about grave diggers and taking treasures from their sacred sites. And I very much had that sentiment that, kind of that paradox of being super grateful to see these wonderful treasures in our world and then feeling like they're encased and encapsulated and imprisoned away from where they should be. But still, I got to see amazing things. I'm not ungrateful for that. If you know Russ Knapp, he was a priest down in Little Rock. He's retired. He lives in England, in London. And so we got to meet for a visit together at his favorite pub, the Lamb. And then just some scenes around it. Also went to the National Gallery and delighted in their religious art around there. That icon, they said, is probably the oldest item in their exhibit, an icon from around, I think, 1100 something. And so it was interesting to notice the religious art up until, around the late 19th, early 19th century. And then it turned to, just more of earthly, secular things. Casey says this is Jesus flipping everybody off, and we just don't know it. He's like, peace, but for some of you. Sorry, Casey, for sharing that story if you're watching this. He's like, this is going to be aired? I don't know. But so just some scenes. I did not get to go into Westminster or the Parliament or take tours of the Tower of London, but I did take a tube bus tour and just go around Western London and had Indian dinner and went to a play. My last night, of course, I saw The Mousetrap because I figured, if I never go again, I need to see Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap, and I can't tell you how it ends. But then I rented a car from the London City Airport and drove down to Canterbury, and where it was very windy and where I gripped the wheel so tightly to stay on the right side of the road, and thankful for modern GPS and navigation and lights and bells and whistles to keep us safe. The middle frame shows the steps up to the candle where the shrine used to be for Thomas à Becket. So Canterbury's lovely. They had a textile exhibit. The Moon Landing is what it was called. And actually, probably the most meaningful place that I visited at Canterbury was in the crypt at the Mary of the Underworld Chapel. So if you have a chance to go, just sit and be and see what she speaks to you. Again, the beautiful trees, beautiful art, beautiful scenes around. And then I've told many of you that I camped in some churches in England. The Church Conservation Project allows you to rent a church. You can have a church all to yourself, and you can camp there overnight, and you can sleep on a lovely, comfortable cot that happens to be right by a first edition King James Bible in a case. And so this was my first camping at St. Lawrence. It's just north of Salisbury, and the wonderful lavender to greet me. The bells ring every hour through the night. No air conditioning, but just beautiful and holy. And some people are like, "You're crazy," telling Casey that there's, but there's like the graves in the floor, and I'm like walking all over these people. And apparently, that's probably an American culture, not to walk across the graves. And at this night, when I was getting ready to eat, I did not eat all of that. But when I was getting ready to eat, I just felt like there was, that I wasn't alone. And so when I prayed for the communion of saints and blessed the space and all that it had been and all that it would be, they're very interested in making it more community involved. These small rural churches, really, championing helps them bring in extra funds. But like many of our rural churches here, they're dying and they're underused. And the priest of this church, who had just retired, they have like 7 yoked congregations in the parish. And the senior warden asked me if I wanted a job. And I was like, I'm on sabbatical and thank you, but I'm happy to go back to my St. Paul's. She's like, I wouldn't take it either. It's pretty hard. But so Champion, she left shortbread for me. That's like behind that wall is the restroom. And that's in the back of the nave. And of course, the door opens up to the churchyard, which is the cemetery. I got to go to Stonehenge. If many of you have been to Stonehenge, they don't let the tourists just walk up to the rocks anymore. So you have to walk around. But it's still quite lovely. And then, of course, so close to Salisbury. I went to Salisbury Cathedral, which those of you who went to Wells also got to visit. Jack told me I should have left like a little note somewhere and told him where. I could have left a little egg. But I'm happy to go to Salisbury, and I mean, probably one of the most beautiful fonts that I know. So it was great to be there and go into the charter house. And then I hear somebody say, Sara. And I was like, God? But if you know Ann Wiggins, she lives in Bella Vista, know her through St. Paul's, and she was there on a tour. So, you never know who you're going to run into at the cloister at Salisbury. And then I went to Stratford-upon-Avon and stayed at the White Swan, which Susan Dewar, I don't know if she's in here. She's like, oh, the Dirty Dove? Apparently the locals call it the Dirty Dove and not the White Swan. I had a lovely experience there. And visiting all the Shakespearean things. This is a beautiful art exhibit. If you're sitting in the chair, that's like you're sitting where Shakespeare would have sat at his writing desk. And the force of his genius, just it has a force on the world. This is all bronze. And so it's just how it smooths the globe, and is rough on one side. And then there's colored pennants on the back that have the names of all the plays. And in the ground, there's little plaques that have verses from his sonnets. And so this is where the new place, his home, would have been if someone rich hadn't bought it later and torn it down. So just some sights from the Shakespeare things in Stratford. Beautiful. Holy Trinity, where he was baptized and where he's buried. Talk to Susan Dewar about his burial and the state of his body. She has an interesting story as well. Anne Hathaway's cottage. My husband's like, Anne Hathaway? I was like, not the Anne Hathaway from Princess Diaries, but the Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway, which they said somebody lived there until the 1990s, somebody in the family. And so it was lovely to go through and be in. And they showed, how they would hang their laundry. And I was like, well, that's not different from Sara hanging her laundry in her hotel room. Says, so for 5 weeks I had a duffel bag in my backpack packed, and my husband was like, you have no room for souvenirs. And so he made me get a suitcase. And so that's why I went ahead and packed the duffel bag in my suitcase. But I wore the same thing over and over for 5 weeks. Went and saw a play at the Royal Shakespeare Conservatory Theater. And then I went to Warwick Castle. On my way across, so Canterbury, Salisbury, Stratford, Warwick, and then they had a bird show, love birds, and inside Warwick Castle they have a Tudor room, so that's Henry VIII and all of his wives and wax figure, they all have their heads, and I had afternoon tea in the Peacock Garden at the conservatory. It was lovely. And then made a pit stop at Cambridge. I needed a new phone charger cable. And there was something going on at Trinity College, so I couldn't go in the chapels there. But I did go in the Great St. Mary's briefly before they closed. And then I made it all the way across to the northeast, just south of Norwich in Limpenhoe, where I stayed at St. Botolph's, and they were having their pizza fundraiser night, and they made 80 oven-fired pizzas. It was very rural. Like at the end of the road was the cow pasture. Across the road was a cornfield. This is a church, and the gate between the rectory and the church and the rectory garden, they invited me over for pizza. They baked pizza for everybody else and realized they hadn't eaten. And so Tim and Louise and their 4 friends invited me to join them. So I got to sit and eat pizza. Glastonbury Festival was going on at the time, and so they talked about their kids who were there. Talked about sailing, the River Uri. This is in the area of the Broads. And so it's quite delightful. They had a tradition about the doorknob is apparently was the handle. There was a treasure chest from a pirate that had been buried in the marshes. And so a couple of fishermen decided to find the treasure chest. And so they went and they found it, and they put a long reed through it, and they were lifting it up by the handle. And then a black, huge, decrepit hand came up out of the marshes and pulled the treasure chest back down, but they got the knocker, the handle. And so they used that as the doorknob of the church. And that's some Yorkshire folktale for you. And he told me, don't lose the keys because they're irreplaceable. And as you see, like they're bigger than my hand. Each door had its own skeleton key. But it was lovely there. That was the window above the nave. That was, again, like 11:30 at night. It got dark around 11:30, and the sun came up. First light at 3:30, and the sun was up at 4, shining beautifully through that window. And again, the friends of the rectory, and then just some prayer books and Bibles that were in the pew, and just in front of the pew is where my cot was, right in front of the altar. So that was my view in the morning around 5 o'clock, and just some views of the church. Yeah, they smell old and musty. Mosquitoes, spiders, all those things. But it was a lovely night's rest. And again, the World War memorials, and that's the River Uri that's there. And then I went up to Norwich for the site of the Julian of Norwich shrine, and went in. And so this isn't the original like door to her cell. It's kind of a recreation of. And so these are scenes from in the chapel, and then these are scenes from in that cell, and like the altar that's there. And they have a bowl of hazelnuts with her quote about the hazelnut. And so I had it, but when I went back to the bookstore and was buying other souvenirs, I was like, this counts as a seed, doesn't it? I was like, I don't want to get stopped at customs because I'm trying to bring a hazel. She's like, well, you have them in America, don't you? I was like, well, yeah. but so I left the hazelnut there, but said prayers for those for whom I was thinking. And then, of course, went to Norwich Cathedral, a world peace sculpture in the middle. And their font, she was telling me, or telling the group, I did a tour there, is from a chocolate factory. And so like a repurposed copper kettle from a chocolate factory, and a story there. And there was a little girl walking the labyrinth in the cloister that was just as beautiful to me as the sanctuary. And then just some scenes around Norwich. And I'm a child that grew up in the 80s. Like, I love Paddington Bear, and I was so delighted to find them. And then lunch at the Bristol Arms, one of the older taverns in Norwich. And then my last night of camping was at St. George the Martyr. And I would give this like a 1-star review. Nobody had personally interacted with me, and as soon as I walked in, it smelled like mothballs and musty. And my night there was not restful. I mean, everything was provided. It was fine, but it just wasn't. I wouldn't stay there again. This alley I chose not to drive through, and I drove around to park on the other side. The pigeons coo also from about midnight to 3. They stop at midnight and start again at 3. So I ate outside because it was so hot in the church. And there wasn't a church service there that morning. Again, it's on one of those, it's in a group. And so I went since I was up at 5 anyway, I drove up to York Minster for service. I was there in time for the 2/3 of choral matins, and then there for the Sunday Eucharist as well. And so it was equally lovely. If we need inspiration for banners, I mean, like they've got some beautifully embroidered banners, and just the tour around the church after services were over and in town. Made my way up from York to Ripon, where I went up to Fountains Abbey, just 20 minutes north of there. So these are just pictures around Fountains Abbey, the gardens, Fountains Hall. They had an art exhibit, and the mill, and then you get to the ruins of Fountains Abbey itself, which, as you're looking at them, you can just imagine from the pictures of the other cathedrals what they might have looked like in their glory days. That's an apple press in the orchard. And so that's the nave, the length of the nave, looking up towards the altar. Just the towers, that's the tile where the altar would have been, like from the 12 or 1300s. And the window where like it would have been above the altar. So just, you can let your imagination wonder. That was me, peeking around. I send, proof of life to family and let them know I'm still making it. This is the solarium there, nice and cool down there. Iconic photograph. And then you can tour around. They have a deer park, and the Studley Royale, I think is the name of it. A contrast between like the industrial age and science, and control of nature versus the spiritual and natural around the Abbey. And then they have a St. Mary's there nearby also, and their font is made of Tennessee marble. Lord Ripon had a relationship with the governor of the Tennessee, and I think that was from like 1867 or 1871. And so after a day of spending at Fountains Abbey, I went and got a Turkish bath. It was lovely. And then I drove up the car and turned it into Glasgow, hopped on the train eventually after several wrong turns and a scenic view of a residential area in Glasgow, and made my way via train to Oban. And there's more train ride pictures. Oban, I missed my tour for the distillery because I missed the train. Had another round of fish and chips. Jim Norris, thanks for the recommendation. Stayed overnight at an Airbnb, and this is more pictures of Oban, and then got on the ferry to make my way out to the Isle of Mull. And in the distance, in that top middle photo, you can see Iona. And so then I spent 6 nights on Iona, near Iona Abbey at St. Columba Hotel. So these are just some images around the island of Iona, which is only 3 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. And the top middle photo is Bishop's House. If any of you have been to Scotland and stayed at the Bishop's House, the Scottish Episcopal Church chapel is there. And, just if you're in Iona, you have icons on the outside of your house, I guess. But it was beautiful. Met a woman, Jill. She's a teacher in Tacoma, Washington. We walked together to Martyrs Bay and then over to the west side to catch the sunset. Cows, thistle, sheep, typical, a Victoria-era post office box is still their working post office box. Inside Iona Abbey, which they've rebuilt, and some more pictures. I'm being fast because it's almost time to go to church. Food, of course, I ate and ate and ate, and it was wonderful. Pipiki is the monk's cat is what the name tag says, but it literally just came up to me in the middle of the road and was like, hello. And so I pet Pipiki and walked around, wore my fleece almost every day that I was in Scotland, just walking around. After that cold day, I was like, I just need a hot pizza and a Coke. So did that. Had set up my little altar of little things that I collected along the way. You can ask me about my story of the otters. I got lost wandering in the marshes and the hills looking for St. Columba's Bay because I didn't follow the path, but I made it, and much to an older woman's surprise. And so I got to go to St. Columba's Bay, which is where he first arrived. It is 363, 383. It's in the 300s when St. Columba arrived there. And so there's a surprise of a labyrinth. I put my feet in the water. A Scottish golf course in Iona looks like that, where the right path can also be covered with water, which may be a reason why I didn't take it to the first time. And St. Columba's is where I stayed, and that's the boat that I took out to Staffa Island. We saw some seals. We saw Fingal's Cave. If you've heard Mendelssohn's, the song that he did a tribute to was inspired by Fingal's Cave. That's as close as I got to the Puffins in the middle. And outside, you walk around, that's the entrance into the cave. So you walk around that, and there's a little rope on the side of the wall, so just be careful. And they said the water was rough. We could either cancel our ride, go a different day, or just risk it. And so it was my last day, so I risked it. And the swells were, it was like riding a horse, and more than one person was sick. But my last night, I did find a scotch that I actually like, much to my husband's delight. I'll tell you a story of Peter Essa if you ask me sometime. And then I spent my last 3 days in Edinburgh. Went to Edinburgh Castle, saw their war memorial, St. Margaret's Chapel, the oldest building in Edinburgh, established in 1093. You can go in. That's it. That's what walking into it there. Hellos to the family. Another pub, tavern. I did rub David Hume's toe. It's good luck, apparently. And St. Giles Cathedral, the Royal Mile. Old St. Paul's is a Scottish Episcopal church there. Russ told me to be sure to stop in. So another St. Paul's. And the Water of Leith and Bernard's Well. Before dinner, I had time to go on a walk, and ChatGPT told me to go to the Water of Leith. And I was walking along and saw in the water movement, and I saw 2 otters playing in the water. So that was a delight. Hard to catch clearly on photos, but and that's just St. Bernard's Well. And steak pie my last night, second to last night. I did the Highlands tour. Saw the Kelpies, the distillery, some haricots, and beautiful scenery. That's Skyfall, where Skyfall Mountain was filmed. Some Harry Potter filming around Scotland too. The Mackenzie and Campbell, that's the monument to the Mackenzies in the middle. And Three Sisters Mountain, there in the Highlands. And Loch Ness, that's not Nessie. It's just somebody's black lab. But we got to see Loch Ness and just some Scottish villages on the way back into Edinburgh. And Bertie was happy to see me when I got home. I brought home a love of tea. The rest of my sabbatical, I got to do lovely things. Go to hot springs, see Alabama Shakes, stay home and swim, see Autumn's last swim meet where her dad's coaching her for the last time on deck. And took my mom to the Oklahoma City First Americans Museum, so that's my mom. And then my last weekend was the full moon, so I watched the sunset and the moon rise on Beaver Lake. And so that's it. So I told you, it was incredibly restful. I know we just flew through that, but just know that it was restful, it was joyful. I took the love of all of you with me. So thank you all for sharing.